Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone. When I was about 10 years old, I was staying at my dad's house for the weekend. It was an ordinary night at first. Nothing felt strange about it. My brother and I were sitting in the kitchen, probably bored, probably waiting for something to happen, the way kids do when there is nothing on TV and the adults are somewhere else in the house. The kitchen had a window that looked out toward the woods behind the house. Those woods were always there. During the day, they did not seem especially frightening. They were just trees. You could see the edge of them from the yard, dark trunks and tangled branches leading back into a thicker patch of forest. Sometimes you could hear birds in there. Sometimes squirrels moved through the leaves. In the fall, the ground would be covered in dead leaves, and in the summer it looked dense and green enough that you could not see very far between the trees. But at night, the woods looked completely different. Once the sun went down, the tree line became one large wall of darkness. You could still see where the yard ended and the woods began, but beyond that, there was almost nothing. The branches blended together. The spaces between the trees looked deeper than they really were. Every shadow seemed like it could be something moving. My brother and I were sitting there looking out the window. I do not remember exactly why. Maybe we had heard something outside. Maybe we were just watching the darkness because we had nothing else to do. We were kids, and kids will stare into the woods at night even when they know it is going to make them nervous. At first, I did not see anything unusual. The yard was dark. The trees were dark. The kitchen lights reflected faintly in the window. I remember being close enough to the glass that I could see my own reflection if I looked at the right angle. Then I noticed two small red dots deep in the woods. They were far back at first, not right near the yard, not near the edge of the trees. They looked like they were somewhere deeper in the forest, far enough away that I could not see what they belonged to. At first I thought they might be some kind of reflection, maybe light catching something between the trees. Maybe someone had a flashlight. Maybe a car was passing on a road somewhere behind the woods, though I do not remember there being a road that close. But the red dots stayed there. They did not flicker like a car light. They did not move like a flashlight. They just hovered in the darkness. I stared at them for a moment, trying to figure out what I was seeing. Then I pointed them out to my brother. I told him to look. At first he probably thought I was messing with him. We were brothers, and like most brothers, we were used to trying to scare each other or make each other look stupid. But he turned toward the window anyway. Then he saw them too. The two red dots were there in the woods. We both sat quietly for a second. I remember that neither of us said much at first. We were trying to make sense of it. The easiest explanation was that it was an animal. That was the first thing we thought. Maybe it was a deer. Maybe it was some kind of animal whose eyes reflected light. We had both seen animals' eyes shine in the dark before. Cats, dogs, deer, raccoons, all kinds of things can have eyes that reflect a strange color when light hits them. That was what we told ourselves. It was just an animal. But then the dots started moving. Very slowly, they moved in the direction of the house. At first, the movement was so slow that I was not sure it was happening. It could have been my eyes adjusting, It could have been branches moving in the wind, but after a few moments, it was obvious. The red dots were getting closer. They were coming through the woods toward the yard. My brother and I leaned closer to the window. We watched them move between the trees. Sometimes they disappeared behind a trunk or branch, then showed up again. They were not moving fast. They were not running. They were not even moving like an animal that had been startled by something. They were moving steadily, one slow step at a time. At that point, we were still trying to convince ourselves it was an animal. We talked quietly about what it could be. Maybe it was a deer coming toward the house. Maybe it was a large dog. Maybe someone had lost a pet. Maybe it was a person carrying something with red lights on it. But then one of us noticed something that made both of us stop talking. The red dots were too high off the ground. They were not near the grass. They were not at the level where a deer's eyes would be. They were not low like a dog's or a raccoon's. They were at least adult head height, maybe higher. We stared at them more carefully. The dots moved closer, and the height did not change. They stayed in the same place, as if whatever they belonged to was standing upright. They were too high to be a normal animal walking on 4 legs. That was when the fear really started. I remember my stomach feeling tight. My brother and I looked at each other, both of us realizing the same thing. We did not say it clearly at first. We did not need to. The woods were dark, and those 2 red dots were moving closer at a height that made no sense. We decided to turn away from the window. I do not remember which one of us said it, but we came up with the kind of childish logic that sounds smart when you are scared. If they can't see us, we can't see them. It made no real sense, but it felt safer than sitting there and staring into the woods. So we turned around. We faced the kitchen instead of the window. I remember sitting there trying to act normal. I probably looked toward the hallway, toward the counter, toward anything except the glass behind us. My brother was quiet too, but neither of us could relax. The whole time, I was wondering whether the red dots were still there. I was wondering whether they were closer. I was wondering whether whatever was in the woods knew we had been watching it. I tried not to turn around. I really did. But after a few minutes, curiosity got the better of me. I slowly looked back toward the window. The eyes were no longer deep in the woods. They were right at the edge of the trees. They were in the bushes near the yard, maybe around 60 feet from the house. That was close enough that I could see more than just the red dots. At first, I could only make out a dark shape standing behind the bushes. The trees and branches were still blocking most of it. The kitchen lights reflected in the window, making it hard to see clearly. I pressed closer to the glass, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the outline. It looked like a tall man, not just a tall animal, not a deer, not a dog standing on its hind legs. It looked like something with a human body shape. Tall shoulders, long arms, a narrow body standing upright in the bushes. But the head did not look human. The head looked like a goat's head. That is the only way I can describe it. It looked like a tall, human-shaped figure with the head of a goat and glowing red eyes. I remember the shape of the face seeming too long. I remember the ears or horns, though I cannot say for certain what I saw. I remember the red eyes standing out against everything else. For a few seconds, I could not move. I was terrified, but I also could not stop looking. My brother was still beside me. I tapped him and told him to look again. He turned toward the window. The figure was still there. We both watched it. It stood at the edge of the woods, partly hidden in the bushes, staring toward the house. It did not step into the yard. It did not run. It did not make a sound. It just stood there. The red eyes did not blink. That was the part I remember most clearly. They were fixed on the house. Fixed on us. I had never seen anything like it before. and I did not want to keep watching long enough to see what it did next. I backed away from the window. Then I turned and ran. I did not care whether my brother followed me. I did not care whether I looked stupid. I did not care whether it was really an animal, a shadow, a trick of the light, or something my mind was making worse. I just wanted to get away from the kitchen. I ran to my room and hid in bed. I pulled the covers over myself, even though I knew that did not really protect me from anything. But when you are 10 years old and you think you have seen something impossible standing outside your house, hiding under the blankets feels like the only thing you can do. I stayed there for a long time. Every noise made me jump. If the house settled, I thought it was footsteps. If the wind moved through the trees, I thought something was coming closer. If I heard a branch scrape against the outside of the house, I imagined those red eyes right outside the window. I do not remember whether I slept that night. I probably did eventually, because I was a kid and exhaustion eventually wins. But I remember lying there scared, trying to listen for movement outside. I remember thinking about the figure standing near the bushes. I remember wondering whether it had seen us watching it through the kitchen window. For the next few days, I kept thinking about it. I did not want to go near the kitchen window at night. I avoided looking toward the woods whenever I could. During the day, the tree line looked normal again. It was just woods. The bushes were just bushes. I could not see any sign that something had stood there. But at night, I could not stop thinking about the red dots. A couple of weeks later, I asked my brother about it. I remember bringing it up carefully. I wanted to know whether he had seen the goat man again. I wanted to know whether he had thought about it too. I wanted him to confirm that it had really happened and that I had not imagined the whole thing. But he brushed me off. He said we had been tired. He said we were kids. He said we had probably been making things up. His answer bothered me more than I expected. At first, I thought maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he did not want to admit he had been scared. Maybe he did not want to talk about something that made him uncomfortable. Brothers do that sometimes. They pretend they are not afraid because they do not want the other one to think they are weak. But part of me wondered whether he really remembered it differently. Maybe he had only seen the red dots and not the figure. Maybe he had not looked long enough to see what I thought was a goat head. Maybe the whole thing had become bigger in my mind after I ran away. Maybe I had mixed the fear, the darkness, and the shape in the bushes into something more terrifying than it really was. I have thought about that possibility a lot over the years. A person can see strange things in darkness. Trees, branches, and bushes can create shapes that look almost human. Animal eyes can reflect red when caught in certain light. A deer standing behind brush, with its head at an odd angle, could look completely wrong for a second. A reflection from the kitchen window could make something ordinary look unnatural. There are plenty of explanations, but none of them completely explain how it felt. I remember both of us seeing the two red dots deep in the woods. I remember both of us watching them slowly come closer. I remember both of us realizing they were too high off the ground. I remember both of us being scared enough to turn away from the window. And I remember calling my brother's attention when the figure was standing at the edge of the trees. Maybe he decided later that it was nothing. Maybe he convinced himself it was an animal. Maybe he only brushed it off because he did not want to think about it anymore. But I still remember it. The woods behind my dad's house never felt the same after that. Before, they were just woods. They were dark, sure, but they were normal. They were part of the yard, part of the view from the kitchen window, part of the place I stayed on weekends. After that night, they became something else. They became a place where two red lights could appear between the trees, a place where something tall could stand at the edge of the bushes and look toward the house, a place where I learned that sometimes the scariest thing is not what you hear outside. It is realizing that something out there may have been watching you the whole time. 2 years ago, I moved out to rural Indiana with some of my best friends. We were sharing a pretty large apartment that sat above my best friend's dad's garage. The setup was strange, but it worked for us. The apartment was big enough that nobody felt completely on top of each other, and the property had a lot of open space around it. There were trees behind the garage, a huge backyard area, and woods close enough that at night they felt like they started right outside the building. It was quiet out there in a way that took some getting used to. During the day, it was normal rural quiet. You could hear birds, the wind in the trees, maybe a car on a distant road. At night, though, the silence became something else. You would hear insects, branches moving, coyotes far off in the woods, and the occasional sound you could not place because there was no traffic or city noise to cover it up. The house itself had a strange history. Most of my family is from that area, so they had known about the building for most of their lives. Before my friend's dad moved in, it had been a church. One side had been the actual chapel, and the other side had been living quarters. The garage and apartment arrangement came later, but the building still had the feeling of having been something else before it became a home. Almost every family member I talked to had the same opinion about it. They thought it was haunted. Not in a joking way either. Not in the usual small town way where everyone says an old place is haunted because it is creaky and dark. They meant it seriously. They would lower their voices when they talked about it. They would tell stories about strange things happening there long before any of us moved in. My mom had her own story. She told me that multiple exorcisms had supposedly been done in the building when it was still connected to the church. I never knew how much of that was local rumor and how much was real. People in small towns can turn one strange event into 10 stories over the years. Still, she seemed completely serious when she described what she had seen. According to her, she had once been there during one of those exorcisms. At some point, the double doors leading into the old living quarters suddenly flew open by themselves. Then, something came down the stairs. She said she could hear it stomping. Not walking, not someone coming down carefully. Stomping, heavy footsteps, one after another, coming down from the upper level. She said the sound was loud enough that everyone heard it, but when people looked, there was nobody there. I did not know what to make of that story. Part of me thought it had to be exaggerated. Part of me thought she had been scared when she was younger and remembered it in the most frightening way possible. But she did not tell it like a campfire story. She told it like something she still did not have an answer for. Then there was the basement. When I first moved in, one of the other friends I lived with took me down there. The basement was unfinished concrete, unused, and colder than the rest of the property. It had the kind of smell old basements have: dust, dampness, old wood, stale air, and something metallic underneath it all. It was not huge, but it was big enough to feel empty. There were storage areas, old pipes, exposed beams, and shadows that made every corner look deeper than it was. But there was one room down there that stood out. It was not quite a closet, but it was too small to be a normal room. It was bigger than a storage space, but smaller than a bedroom. It had no obvious purpose. No furniture, no shelves, no equipment, no reason to be there that I could understand. The only thing inside was a symbol painted in the middle of one wall. I do not remember the exact symbol now. I only remember that it looked intentional. It was not random graffiti. It was painted carefully, centered on the wall like someone wanted it to be seen. The second I looked at it, I felt uncomfortable. It gave off one of those feelings that is hard to explain without sounding ridiculous. There was nothing physically attacking us. Nothing moved. No sound came from the room. But something about standing there made me want to leave. The friend who showed me the basement felt the same way. We looked it up online later because we were curious and because that is what people do when they find something creepy in an old basement. The search results said it was connected to some demon or entity that supposedly preferred taking children's souls, or something close to that. I cannot remember the exact name or the exact description. I only remember that the result made us feel worse, not better. We joked about it afterward, because that was easier than admitting the room bothered us. But none of us spent much time down there after that. Still, for the most part, life in the apartment was normal. We worked, played games, watched movies, ordered food, complained about bills, and did all the regular things roommates do. The old church history became one of those stories people brought up when it was late, and everyone was already a little uneasy. Then one night, something happened to me that made the whole place feel different. It was around 1 a.m. All my roommates were asleep. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow from electronics and whatever moonlight came through the windows. I had gotten home from work not long before and was too wound up to go straight to bed. I decided to go outside, smoke some weed, look at the moon, and listen to Radiohead for a while. That had become a routine for me. When I wanted to relax after work, I would go around the back of the garage toward the forest. There was a big, open backyard area behind the property, and beyond that was the tree line. It was quiet back there. Nobody bothered me. I could listen to music, look up at the sky, and clear my head. Usually I took our pit bull puppy, Sweetie, with me. Sweetie was incredibly well trained. She did not need a leash when we were just walking around the property. She stayed close, watched me, and followed wherever I went. She was still young, but she was smart and protective in her own way. There were packs of coyotes around the area sometimes. You would hear them at night, usually farther back in the woods. Sweetie would normally scare them off just by being there. She was confident, alert, and not the kind of dog that got nervous over every little sound. That night, when I got ready to go outside, she followed me like usual. We went down and around the back of the garage. The air was cool. The grass was damp. The moon was out enough to light parts of the yard, but the woods were still mostly black. The trees formed a solid wall of shadow beyond the open area. I started walking toward the forest. Then, Sweetie stopped. At first, I did not think much of it. I assumed she had smelled something. Dogs stop all the time. Maybe there was a rabbit in the grass. Maybe a coyote had been nearby. Maybe she had caught the scent of another animal and wanted to investigate. But she did not move toward it. She just stood there. Then she started whining. It was not an excited whine. It was not the sound she made when she wanted to play or when she wanted me to throw something. It sounded nervous. I called her. I told her to come on. Normally, that would have been enough. She would have followed me immediately. But she refused. She stayed where she was, staring toward the woods. Her ears were low. Her body looked tense. She would take a step toward me, then stop again. I called her a second time. Nothing. That was the first moment I felt a little uneasy. Sweetie was not the type to refuse me for no reason. If she saw a coyote, I would expect her to get loud, bark, growl, or try to chase it away. But she was not acting aggressive. She was acting afraid. I walked back to her and tried to get her to move. She still would not go toward the forest. So I took her back inside. I brought her up to the apartment and put her on my bed. I told her to sit. She listened, but she was shaking by then. Actually shaking. That should have been enough to make me stay inside. I should have taken it seriously. I should have decided that whatever was out there was not worth going back out into the dark alone. But I was tired, stubborn, and not thinking clearly. I told myself she had probably seen a coyote that was bigger than usual. Maybe it had been close to the tree line. Maybe it had scared her because she was still young. so I left her in my room and went back outside. The second time I went around the garage, it felt different. I had my headphones on, but not loud enough that I could not hear anything around me. The moonlight was still there, shining weakly across the grass. The open yard looked empty. The woods looked like they always did, black, thick, and too quiet. I started walking toward the forest again. Then I noticed something in my peripheral vision. It felt like something was walking beside me, not behind me, not somewhere far away, beside me, almost directly next to me. At first I ignored it. I thought it was just a shadow. Maybe it was the moonlight creating an odd shape on the ground. Maybe it was my own movement reflected through my peripheral vision. I kept walking and tried not to think about it. But the feeling did not go away. Whatever I was seeing seemed to keep pace with me. I could not make out details without turning my head. I only knew there was a pale shape moving at the edge of my vision. It looked too close. It moved when I moved. It was there every time I glanced slightly to the side. I kept going for a few more steps. Then something in my head clicked. It was not a voice exactly. It was more like a sudden thought that did not feel like my normal thoughts. You did not imagine that. I stopped. My whole body went cold. Then I turned my head. Standing beside me was a white figure. It was only about as tall as my waist. It looked like a small person, but not one I could explain. It had a pale shape, almost white against the darkness, and it looked like it was wearing a dress. Not a modern dress. Not something clear enough that I could identify the style. Just a white dress-like shape hanging around it. I remember seeing it for only a moment, but that moment was enough. It was too close. It was walking beside me, and it was not supposed to be there. I froze. Then something whispered directly into my ear. I do not know what it said. I could not understand the words, or maybe there were no real words. It was just a whisper, low and close enough that I felt it more than I heard it. That was when I ran. I took off across the backyard toward the open area where I usually sat and smoked. I did not look back. I did not care what the figure was. I did not care whether I was high, tired, anxious, or imagining things. I just wanted to be away from the forest. I ran into the open space and stopped only when I was far enough from the tree line that I could breathe again. For a while, I stood there trying to calm down. The moonlight made the open yard feel safer than the woods. I could see around me. There were no trees close enough for something to hide behind. I could still see the outline of the garage and the apartment above it. I lit up and sat down where I usually sat. I put on Radiohead. Specifically, I listened to In Rainbows, probably for the 1,000th time in my life. I knew the album well enough that it felt comforting. It gave me something familiar to focus on. I tried to convince myself that I had overreacted. Maybe I had seen a piece of trash caught in the weeds. Maybe the moonlight had hit something white. Maybe I had been walking past a fence post, a bush, or a reflection, and my brain turned it into a little figure. Maybe Sweetie had seen a coyote, and her fear had made me more nervous than I realized. Maybe the whisper was just wind, an earbud, or some sound from the trees. The longer I sat there, the more I talked myself into believing that. Eventually, I started to feel stupid for running. I told myself I had imagined the entire thing. I had smoked. I was tired after work. It was 1 a.m. The woods were creepy. The building had a weird history. My mom had told me stories about exorcisms. I had seen that symbol in the basement. Of course, my mind would create something. That was what I told myself. After I finished smoking, I decided I was done for the night. I wanted to go inside, check on Sweetie, and go to bed. The fastest way back to the apartment was the same way I had come. I had to cross the huge open area with the woods behind it and head back toward the garage. I stood up and started walking. At first, everything felt normal. The music was still playing quietly. The yard was still. The moonlight spread across the grass. Behind me, the forest was a dark line against the sky. Then I saw something moving in the darkness. It was farther away at first, near the edge of the woods. I stopped walking. At first I thought it was an animal. That was the obvious explanation. Maybe a deer, maybe a coyote, maybe something bigger moving through the grass. But I kept watching. The shape was moving fast, really fast. It was running through the darkness. I tried to make out what it was. The moonlight caught it in pieces as it moved. I could see 2 legs. I could see that it was large. Too large to be a dog. Too tall to be a coyote. It was running upright. For a few seconds, I just watched. I was curious, which was stupid. I wanted to know what I was looking at. I kept thinking that maybe it was one of my roommates messing with me, or maybe someone from nearby walking across the property. Then it moved into better moonlight, and I realized it was heading directly toward me. Not wandering, not passing by, not moving along the edge of the trees, sprinting at me. The shape looked huge. It was dark, but I could see the outline of something tall and broad. It looked like a hulking shadow person, bigger than any person I knew. It was moving too fast for how large it seemed. The way it ran did not look right. It was not smooth. It was heavy and violent, like it was throwing itself forward through the dark. I did not wait to see more. I ran. I turned and sprinted back toward the apartment as fast as I could. I could hear something behind me. I do not know if it was footsteps. I do not know if it was branches snapping, grass moving, or my own panic making every sound feel closer. But I heard something following me. It stayed behind me all the way back. I ran past the garage. I ran to the door. I got inside as fast as I could and shut it behind me. I locked it. Then I stood there in the dark, trying to catch my breath, listening for anything outside. Nothing came after me. There was no knock, no scratching, no voice, no sound at the door, just silence. I went upstairs and checked on Sweetie. She was still on my bed, still tense, but she was not shaking as badly as before. I sat with her for a while because I did not want to be alone. I kept replaying what I had seen. The little white figure, the dress, the whisper, then the huge shadow shape sprinting toward me from the woods. By morning, I had started questioning everything. I knew people would say it was the weed. That was the first thing anyone would blame, and honestly, I understood why. I had been outside smoking in the dark. I had been listening to music. I had been alone. I had been in a place with a creepy history. But I had smoked plenty of times before. I had never hallucinated. I had never seen figures walking beside me. I had never heard whispers in my ear. I had never watched a huge shape sprint out of the darkness toward me. I was not so tired that I was falling asleep on my feet. I was not drunk. I was not sick. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before, and nothing like it has happened since. My friends told me stories too. They had their own strange experiences in and around the property. Things they heard, things they saw, feelings they got in certain parts of the building. Nobody could ever agree on exactly what it meant, and nobody had proof of anything. But when I told people my story, most of them did not believe the last part. They might believe that Sweetie was scared of a coyote. They might believe that I saw something in the woods and got nervous. They might believe that I mistook a shadow for a person. But they did not believe that something large ran toward me across the field. They did not believe that I heard it following me all the way back to the apartment. I cannot prove it happened. I do not have a video. I do not have a picture. I do not have anyone else who saw that exact thing with me. All I have is what I remember. I remember Sweetie refusing to go toward the forest. I remember her shaking on my bed. I remember feeling something walk beside me. I remember turning and seeing a small white figure in a dress at my side. I remember the whisper in my ear, and I remember standing in that open field later, looking into the dark, watching something tall and huge run directly toward me. Maybe there is a normal explanation for all of it. Maybe the white figure was a trick of the moonlight. Maybe the large shape was an animal moving in a way I did not understand. Maybe fear made every sound behind me feel like it was following. Maybe the history of that old church had gotten into my head before I ever stepped outside. But I know what it felt like. And I know that when I reached the apartment door that night, I did not feel like I had escaped something imagined. I felt like I had barely made it back inside. My cousin was staying over, and I was 12 while she was 13. It was probably around 1 in the morning when we decided we wanted to be brave and sneak out to the 7-Eleven down the road for sweets and energy drinks. Looking back, it was such a stupid idea. At the time, though, it felt exciting. We were both at that age where doing something small and forbidden felt like a huge adventure. We were not planning to go far. The store was only down the road, and we told ourselves we would be back quickly. We just wanted snacks, energy drinks, and the thrill of being outside when everyone else was asleep. The house was quiet when we left. Everyone inside had gone to bed, and we were careful not to make too much noise. We moved slowly, whispering and trying not to laugh too loudly. I remember feeling nervous, but it was the fun kind of nervous. The kind where you know you are doing something you should not be doing, but you are still convinced nothing bad will happen because you are only going to the corner store. The streets were almost empty. There were a few streetlights, but not enough to make everything bright. Most of the road was dark between them. Houses sat quiet with their curtains closed. A few windows had lights on, but most of the neighborhood looked asleep. There were no people walking around, no cars passing, no sounds except our footsteps, the occasional distant noise from somewhere farther down the road, and the rustling of leaves whenever the wind picked up. We talked quietly as we walked. I do not remember everything we said, but I remember us trying to act older than we were. We probably joked about getting caught. We probably said we would be in trouble if our parents woke up and noticed we were gone. We probably kept telling each other that it was fine because we were only going to the store and coming straight back. When we got to the 7-Eleven, everything still felt normal. The bright lights inside made the place feel safe after the dark street outside. There were probably only a few people in there, maybe someone behind the counter and another customer or two. We wandered around looking at sweets and drinks, taking longer than we needed to because we were excited to be out alone at night. We bought what we wanted and stepped back outside. That was when things started feeling different. We had barely started walking home when we saw a police car coming down the road. At least, we thought it was a police car. It was coming from farther down the street, and because it was dark, all we could really make out at first were headlights and the shape of a vehicle. But our brains immediately decided it was the police. Maybe there had been some lights reflecting off it. Maybe we had seen the shape wrong. Maybe we were already paranoid because we knew we were not supposed to be out. Either way, we both panicked. We were 12 and 13. We had no real idea how police worked. In our minds, being outside at 1 in the morning was enough to get arrested. We imagined getting caught, having our parents called, being dragged home in embarrassment, and getting punished for weeks. Now I know that was ridiculous. A police officer would probably have just asked why 2 kids were out so late and tried to get us home safely. But we were young, scared, and convinced we were about to get in major trouble. So we ran. There was a small field near the road, and we ran into it to hide. The field was big and mostly empty, with only 2 or 3 trees scattered across it. There was nowhere truly good to hide, but in that moment, one tree felt like enough. We crouched behind it, trying to stay quiet. The grass was cold and damp against our legs. I remember holding my breath and trying not to make any noise. My cousin was beside me, and I could tell she was scared too. We kept peeking around the edge of the tree, trying to see whether the police car had gone past. The road was not in great shape, and every vehicle that drove over it sounded louder than it should have. The tires hitting cracks and uneven patches made this deep, rattling sound that carried through the quiet night. At first, we thought that was all we were hearing, a police car driving away down the road. But then the sound stopped. The vehicle had stopped. We both went still. For a few seconds, we did not move. We were waiting for it to drive on. We were waiting to hear the engine fade into the distance. It did not. I remember slowly leaning around the tree to look. And there was no police car. There was a big white van. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. I thought maybe we had made a mistake from the beginning. Maybe it had never been a police car. Maybe we had only seen headlights in the dark and assumed the worst because we were scared of getting caught. But the van did not feel normal. It was large, plain, and white, the kind of vehicle that looked almost blank under the streetlights. I do not remember clear markings on the side. I do not remember a company logo or anything that would explain why it was parked there in the middle of the night. It had stopped near the field, near us. My cousin looked too. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she screamed, "Run!" It was not a normal scream. It was not loud enough to wake the whole street, but it was sharp and scared. The kind of sound someone makes when they suddenly understand that something is very wrong. We took off running. I do not remember thinking. I do not remember deciding where to go. I just followed her. We ran away from the field and toward the houses, holding our bags of snacks and energy drinks like they mattered, even though neither of us cared about them anymore. I remember my feet hitting the pavement hard. I remember the cold air burning in my throat. I remember the sound of us breathing, fast and uneven, as we ran. Then I looked behind me. The van was following us. It was not speeding after us with sirens or lights. It was moving down the road behind us, keeping close enough that we knew it had not just happened to be going the same way. The headlights moved over the street and houses as it came after us. That was when I felt real fear. Not fear of being grounded, not fear of being caught sneaking out. Fear that something bad was happening and that we had put ourselves in the middle of it. My cousin and I ran faster. We cut through yards. We crossed paths we did not normally take. We did not care whether we were trespassing or making noise. We just wanted to get away from the road where the van could follow us easily. At some point, we came to a fence. I do not remember whose yard it was or exactly what the fence looked like. I only remember that it was high enough to slow us down and low enough that we could climb over it if we were desperate. And we were desperate. My cousin went first. She climbed and threw herself over. I followed right behind her. As we got over the fence, we heard the van doors open. That sound has stayed with me. It was not loud, but in the middle of the night, everything sounded louder. The sliding or swinging door opened somewhere behind us, and it made us panic even more. We did not look back again. We jumped another fence. I remember scraping myself on it, catching my clothes, almost falling, then getting up and running again. My cousin was ahead of me, and I was trying not to lose her. We were both crying by then, or close to it. We were scared enough that we could barely think. We ran through backyards. Every dark house looked dangerous. Every bush looked like someone could be hiding behind it. Every sound made us flinch. We did not know whether the van was still following us, whether someone had gotten out, or whether we had managed to lose it. We only knew we had to hide. Eventually, we found a neighbor's backyard shed. It was one of those small sheds people use for tools, lawnmowers, old boxes, and gardening stuff. It was dark and probably dirty, but we did not care. We got inside somehow, pulled the door as quietly as we could, and stayed there. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. We were trying to listen. We could hear our own breathing. We could hear each other trying not to cry. Outside, every little sound felt huge. A car in the distance made us freeze. A dog barking somewhere down the road made us think someone had found us. The wind moving against the shed sounded like footsteps. We sat in that shed for what felt like forever. I do not know exactly how long it was. Maybe an hour, maybe a little less, but it felt much longer because we were terrified. We were scared to leave. We were scared to use our phones, if we even had them with us. We were scared to make any noise. We were scared that the van might still be driving around, looking for us. At some point, we whispered about calling someone, but then we worried our parents would find out we had snuck out. We worried they would be angry. We worried we would get in trouble for being outside so late. At 12 and 13, that fear still mattered to us, even after everything that had happened. It sounds stupid now. If I could go back, I would tell us to call our parents immediately. I would tell us to call the police. I would tell us to tell an adult everything. I would tell us that getting grounded would have been nothing compared to the possibility that someone had actually been following us. But we were kids. We were scared of adults being mad at us, and we did not know how to explain something that already sounded unbelievable. Eventually, the neighborhood became quiet again. We did not hear the van. We did not hear voices. We did not hear footsteps near the shed. After sitting there for a long time, we decided to make our way home. We moved carefully, trying to stay away from the main road. We kept looking around corners before stepping out. We stayed close to houses and fences. Every set of headlights in the distance made our stomachs drop. When we finally got back to the house, we slipped inside and went to bed without waking anyone. I do not remember sleeping much. Every sound outside made me think about the van. I kept imagining it parked down the road. I kept imagining someone standing outside the house. I kept thinking about the doors opening while we climbed the fence. The next day, we tried to tell some of our friends. They did not believe us. I cannot really blame them. The story sounded dramatic. Two kids sneak out late at night, think a police car is coming, hide in a field, discover it is a white van, get chased, jump fences, and hide in a shed. It sounds like something made up to scare people. But we were not making it up. We had both seen the van. We had both heard it stop. We had both heard the doors open. We had both run. We had both spent that night hiding in a stranger's shed because we were too scared to go home. The worst part was that, a few months later, we heard that someone had been abducted in the area. I do not know the details. I do not know whether it was connected to the van. I do not know whether it happened near the same road or whether it had anything to do with us. I never checked properly. We moved away not long after, and life went on. But hearing about it made the memory feel worse. It made me wonder whether we had been right to run. It made me wonder what would have happened if we had stayed behind that tree for another minute. It made me wonder whether the van had really been following us, or whether we had panicked and misunderstood everything. I have gone over that night many times in my mind. Maybe the van had only stopped because the driver needed directions. Maybe it had been parked nearby for some normal reason. Maybe we were scared kids who ran, and the van happened to be driving in the same direction. Maybe the sound of the doors opening had come from somewhere else. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all of it. But there are details I cannot forget. The van stopping after we hid, the way my cousin screamed for me to run, the headlights following us, the sound of the doors opening as we jumped the fence, the feeling of being watched while we sat in that shed, trying not to breathe too loudly, and the fact that neither of us had any reason to invent it. We were not trying to look brave. We were not trying to scare anyone. We were terrified. We did not even tell our parents because we thought we would get in trouble for leaving the house in the first place. For years, I felt embarrassed that we had been too scared to tell adults. Now I understand that we were just children. We made a bad decision by sneaking out, but that did not mean we deserved to be frightened. It did not mean we should have had to figure out on our own whether someone in a van was following us. The older I get, the more I think about how close it may have been. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe we only got ourselves worked up in the dark. But maybe it was not nothing. Maybe the reason I still remember that night so clearly is because some part of me understood, even then, that we were in danger. All I know is that we went out for sweets and energy drinks because we wanted to feel brave. And before the night was over, we were hiding in a stranger's shed, praying that the van would not find us. My brother always had terrible night terrors when he was a kid. They were awful for him, but they were scary for everyone else too. He would wake up confused, crying, yelling, or talking like he was still trapped inside a dream. Sometimes he would sit up suddenly and stare at something nobody else could see. Sometimes he would walk around the house half awake, not really recognizing anyone who tried to talk to him. For years, my parents dealt with it the best they could. They would calm him down, bring him water, sit with him until he fell asleep again, and try to make sure he did not hurt himself when he got up in the middle of the night. Eventually, he got so scared of sleeping alone that he started sleeping on the floor in my parents' room, and he kept doing that until he was 16. By then, it had become normal in our house. My parents had their bed, and my brother had a blanket and pillow on the floor beside it. He would sleep there because he said he felt safer. Nobody really questioned it anymore. We all knew he had problems sleeping, and we all knew he had nightmares that seemed more real to him than normal dreams. My bedroom was the closest one to my parents' room. Because of that, I would hear things sometimes. I would hear my brother wake up crying. I would hear my mom or dad speaking quietly to him. I would hear footsteps in the hallway at strange hours. I would hear doors opening and shutting. For a long time, it was just part of the background of growing up in that house. I got used to it. If I heard my brother moving around at night, I did not immediately panic. I assumed he was having another night terror. I assumed he had gotten up confused and would eventually be taken back to my parents' room. That was why, the night I saw something in front of my mirror, I did not realize right away how wrong it was. I was asleep in my bed with my cat under the blankets beside me. My cat liked to sleep close to me. She would curl up under the covers near my legs or against my side, especially when the weather was cold. Most of the time, she was calm at night. Once she was asleep, nothing bothered her. She did not jump at every little sound. She was not the kind of cat that would suddenly freak out for no reason. That night, I woke up because she moved. Not just moved. She launched herself upward from under the blankets. 1 second she was curled against me, warm and quiet. The next second, she sprang up so fast that the blankets lifted with her. Her back arched. Her fur stood up. She hissed so loudly that it snapped me fully awake. Then she spat. I had never heard her make that sound before. It was angry, sharp, and scared all at once. For a moment, I did not know what was happening. I was still half asleep. My room was dark except for the faint light coming in through the window. The house was quiet. I could hear my cat growling under her breath. which was already enough to make me nervous. Then I looked toward my mirror. There was someone standing in front of it. At first I thought it was my brother. The figure looked small enough that my tired brain tried to make it fit. I could see the pale outline of a person standing near the mirror, and I assumed he had wandered into my room during another night terror. He was wearing what looked like white underwear. That was why I thought it might be him. My brother would sometimes sleep in nothing but underwear when he was younger, especially in warmer weather. So when I saw the pale shape standing there in the dark, my first thought was not that there was an intruder or anything supernatural. I thought, great, he is having another episode. I was tired, annoyed, and used to dealing with him being awake at night. So I spoke to him calmly. I told him to go back to bed. I do not remember my exact words, but it was something simple. Maybe I said, go back to Mom and Dad's room. Maybe I told him he needed to stop standing there and go sleep. I was not scared at first. I was just trying to get him out of my room so I could go back to sleep. The figure did not move. It stood there in front of the mirror with its back or side partly turned toward me. My cat was now fully awake. She had climbed onto the top of my bookshelf, which was something she almost never did. She was crouched there with her ears flat and her fur raised, staring at the figure. She kept hissing. Every few seconds, she would make that low, rough, growling sound cats make when they feel trapped. I remember looking from my cat to the figure. Something started to feel wrong. My brother did not usually stand completely still when he had night terrors. He would pace, he would cry, he would mumble, he would look confused. Even when he was half asleep, he moved like a normal person. This thing was not moving. I told it again to go back to bed. That was when it turned around. And the second it faced me, I knew it was not my brother. I did not need time to compare faces. I did not need to think about it. The thought hit me so hard it felt like someone had shouted it directly into my head. That is not my brother. That is not my brother. That is not my brother. The thing standing in front of the mirror looked vaguely human, but not in the way a person should look. It was pale, extremely pale. Not pale like someone who had been sick or had not seen the sun. Pale in a way that seemed almost colorless, like all the warmth had been drained out of it. Its skin looked smooth from a distance, but not normal. Its face was wrong. I have always struggled to explain exactly what made it look so wrong, because I do not remember every individual feature. What I remember is the feeling of seeing it and instantly knowing that I should not be looking at it. Its eyes were black, not just dark brown or shadowed because the room was dim, black and huge. They looked too large for its face, wide and empty like deep holes that did not reflect any light. I remember staring at them for only a moment, but that moment felt endless. They were fixed on me. There was no anger in them that I could understand, no expression that I could read, just staring. The thing seemed to grow. I know that sounds impossible, and maybe it was only my fear changing the way I saw it. But as I looked at it, it seemed to stretch upward. It became taller and taller until it felt like it was nearly as tall as the room. It went from something I had mistaken for my brother to something long, thin, pale, and towering over everything around it. The ceiling was not especially high, but it felt as though the thing was reaching it. Its body was too skinny. Its arms seemed too long. Its shape was almost human, but stretched in a way that made it look unfinished or distorted. The worst part was that it never stopped staring at me. My cat was still on top of the bookshelf, hissing and spitting. She was scared enough that she had pressed herself against the wall, as high as she could get. She would not look away from the thing either. That was what made me panic. If it had only been me, I might have told myself I was dreaming. I might have blamed sleep, shadows, or the fact that I had just woken up. But my cat was reacting to it too. She was terrified. She was acting like something dangerous had entered the room. I screamed. I do not remember deciding to scream. It just came out of me. Then I reached for the light. The switch was beside my bed, and I hit it hard enough that I probably hurt my hand. The room flooded with light, and the thing was gone. There was nothing in front of the mirror, nothing standing by the wall, nothing near the bookshelf, nothing under the bed, nothing, just my room. The mirror reflected the light. My clothes were where they belonged. My shelves were where they always were. My cat was still on top of the bookshelf, staring at the empty space in front of the mirror, her fur still standing up. I kept screaming. My parents came running into the room. They asked what happened. They looked around. They checked the closet. They checked behind the door. They checked the hallway. They looked out the window. There was nothing. Then my brother came in. He was wearing pajamas, actual pajamas. He looked confused and sleepy, standing behind my parents in the doorway. The second I saw him, my stomach dropped. He was not wearing white underwear. He had not been in my room. He had been asleep in my parents' room, or at least he had been there when they came to get him. I tried to explain what I had seen. I told them there had been someone in front of my mirror. I told them I thought it was my brother at first, but it was not. I told them it had black eyes. I told them it was tall. I told them my cat had seen it too. My parents tried to calm me down. They told me it was probably a nightmare. They said I had woken up scared and seen something in the dark. They said the cat may have reacted to me screaming or to some normal sound in the house. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had been half awake. Maybe the mirror, shadows, and darkness created a shape that my brain turned into something horrifying. Maybe my cat had jumped because she heard a noise from outside or a mouse in the wall. Maybe everything happened at once, and my memory put it together in the worst possible way. But even after the light came on, I could not stop shaking. I remember staring at the mirror for the rest of the night. I did not want to look directly at it, but I also could not stop looking toward it. I kept expecting the thing to appear again. I expected to see it in the reflection. I expected the black eyes to be there behind me, staring from the corner of the room. It never came back. At least, not for me. After that night, I never saw it again. I did not see it in my room. I did not see it in the hallway. I did not see it in the mirror. I did not hear it moving around the house. And I was very happy for that. For years, I tried to put the experience into the same category as a nightmare. That was what everyone told me it was. A nightmare. A half-awake hallucination. A shadow in a dark room. A fear response. I tried to believe that because the alternative was worse. The alternative was that something had stood in front of my mirror, something that looked enough like my brother at first to fool me, and then turned around to show me a face that was not human. As I got older, I stopped talking about it. It became one of those things that happened when you were young and scared. A memory that sits in the back of your mind but sounds foolish when you say it out loud. People do not usually react well when you tell them you saw a pale, tall figure with huge black eyes standing in your room. So I kept it to myself. My brother kept having sleep problems for a long time too. He did not talk much about what scared him. Everyone knew he had night terrors. Everyone knew he did not like sleeping alone. But nobody ever pressed him too hard. It was easier to call it a childhood problem and let him grow out of it. Eventually, he did get older. Eventually, he stopped sleeping on my parents' floor. Eventually, he was able to live normally, go to school, date, work, and do all the things people do when they leave childhood behind. The memory of that night faded into the background for me. Then, about 20 years later, I heard him talking to his new girlfriend. It was not a serious conversation at first. They were sitting together, talking about childhood, fears, strange memories, and things that happened when they were young. I was nearby, but I was not really paying attention. Then I heard him say something that made every hair on my arms stand up. He said he could never sleep when he was a kid because the long, skinny dude with white skin watched him all the time. I froze. For a second, I wondered if I had heard him wrong. Maybe he was talking about a nightmare character. Maybe he was making something up to scare his girlfriend. Maybe he had seen a movie or read a story that gave him those images. But he kept talking. He described a tall, skinny figure, white skin, always watching him. He said it would stand in his room and stare. He said that was why he slept on the floor in our parents' room for so long. He did not feel safe alone because he believed the thing would come back if he slept by himself. I do not remember what I said right away. I may not have said anything at all at first. I remember feeling cold. I remember looking at him and realizing that he had never told me this before. Not once. We had never compared stories. We had never agreed on some creepy childhood monster and kept it going for fun. He had his own memory, and somehow it sounded too close to mine. The long, skinny dude with white skin. The watcher. The thing standing silently in the room. I did not tell him everything immediately. Part of me did not want to. I did not want to put my own memory into his head. I did not want to make him think I was trying to force a connection. I did not want to ask questions that could change the way he remembered it. But inside, I was terrified, because I remembered the thing in front of my mirror. I remembered thinking it was him. I remembered the pale skin. I remembered the unnatural height. I remembered the huge black eyes. And I remembered how my cat had reacted before I even understood what I was looking at. Maybe we both had nightmares. Maybe we both grew up in the same house, heard the same creaks, saw the same shadows, and created similar fears without realizing it. Maybe our parents' room became a safe place for him because of his night terrors, and later his mind gave those fears a shape. Maybe my own memory was shaped by years of seeing him wake up terrified. There are normal explanations. There always are. But hearing him describe that figure 20 years later was one of the coldest moments of my life. Because I had never told him about what I saw. Not in detail. Not enough for him to repeat anything close to it. And he had never told me that he saw something pale and long and skinny watching him at night. After all those years, I still do not know what happened in my room. I do not know if I saw a nightmare, a shadow, or something caused by waking too suddenly. I do not know if my cat reacted to a sound I never noticed. I do not know why my brother described something so similar decades later. All I know is that one night, I woke up to my cat hissing like she had found something dangerous in my room. I looked up and saw what I thought was my brother standing in front of my mirror. Then it turned around, and I knew it was not my brother. Before the next story begins, thank you for staying here in the dark. If this is your first visit, subscribe to Wickless Night for more true stories made for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every little noise feels important. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has made you look around the room so far. Now, let's continue. When I was in middle school, my family moved into a new apartment, and almost immediately I started having trouble sleeping in my room. There was nothing obviously wrong with the place. It was a normal apartment. It had normal rooms, normal neighbors, normal sounds coming through the walls, and all the usual things that come with moving into a new home. At first, everyone else seemed fine. My parents got used to the new place. The furniture was unpacked. We settled into routines. Life kept moving forward. But I never really felt comfortable in my bedroom. From the first few nights, something about being in there made me uneasy. I could not explain it to anyone in a way that sounded reasonable. The room was not especially dark. It did not have strange stains on the walls or weird noises coming from the closet. There was nothing I could point at and say, that is the problem. It was just a feeling. I would lie in bed at night and feel watched. Not in the casual way where you get nervous after watching a scary movie and start imagining things in the corner of the room. This was different. It felt more focused than that. It was the feeling of someone standing behind you, staring at the back of your head, waiting for you to notice. It felt like burning eyes. That is still the best way I can describe it. I would lie facing the wall or facing away from the room, and I could feel the pressure of someone looking at me from behind. It was like the air around the back of my neck changed, like there was something in the room that was paying attention to me. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just getting used to a new apartment. Moving can make everything feel strange for a while. The sounds are different. The shadows are different. Your brain has not learned which creaks belong to the floorboards and which sounds come from people walking in the hallway outside. So I tried to act normal. I would get into bed, turn off the light, and pull the blankets up. I would tell myself that I was tired and that I needed to sleep. I would close my eyes and try not to think about the feeling. But I never wanted to turn around. That was the strange part. I knew there was probably nothing there. At least, that was what I kept telling myself. But whenever I felt watched, I would stay facing the wall. I would keep my eyes shut. I would lie completely still and pretend I did not feel it. I was too scared to look behind me. It is hard to explain why. I was not seeing anything at first. I was not hearing voices. I was not seeing someone walk through the room. I only felt watched. But that feeling became so strong that looking over my shoulder felt like a bad idea. Like there was a part of me that already knew I did not want confirmation. Some nights, I would pull the blanket closer around me and try to make myself smaller. I would listen to the apartment outside my room. I would hear the normal things, a distant television, plumbing, a cabinet closing, my parents talking quietly in another room, maybe a neighbor walking above or below us. Those normal sounds should have helped. They should have reminded me that I was safe. Instead, they made the silence inside my room feel worse. There would be all these ordinary sounds around me, but the space directly behind my bed felt too quiet, too still. It felt like something was standing there without breathing, without moving, without doing anything except watching. I would tell myself that I was being stupid. I was in middle school. I was old enough to know better, or at least I felt like I should have been. I did not want to be the kid who was afraid of the dark. I did not want to go wake my parents and say I felt like someone was staring at me. I already knew what they would probably say. They would tell me it was a new home. They would tell me I had a big imagination. They would tell me to get some sleep. And maybe they would have been right. So, I never told them. Instead, I learned to deal with it by refusing to look. I would lie in bed, feel that burning stare on the back of my head, and keep my eyes shut until I eventually fell asleep. Or maybe I would stay awake for a long time, waiting for the feeling to fade. Sometimes I would turn on a light. Sometimes I would leave the bedroom door cracked open so I could see some light from the hallway. But even with the door open, I still felt watched. The feeling did not happen every single night. At least, not that I remember. But it happened enough that my room became the place I least wanted to be after dark. During the day, it was just my room. I did homework there. I got dressed there. I listened to music. I sat on my bed and looked at my phone or read books. In daylight, the room looked harmless. The furniture was ordinary. The walls were ordinary. The closet was ordinary. Everything was exactly where it should be. But at night, once the lights were off, it felt different. The room seemed to get larger. The corners seemed darker. The space behind me felt occupied. And no matter how many times I told myself it was only my imagination, I would still refuse to turn around. Then one night, I got tired of being scared. I do not know what made that night different from the others. Maybe I had been dealing with the feeling for weeks or months by then. Maybe I was exhausted from lying there every night, pretending it did not bother me. Maybe I was angry at myself for being afraid of nothing. I remember lying in bed with my back facing the room. The lights were off. The apartment was quiet. And once again, I felt that same pressure. Those burning eyes against the back of my head. It was stronger than usual that night. I could feel it so clearly that I could almost picture where it was coming from. I had the sense that something was standing or hovering behind me, close enough that if I turned over, it would be there. I stayed still for a long time. My heart was beating too fast. I kept telling myself that I needed to stop. I needed to stop being afraid. I needed to turn around and prove to myself there was nothing there. Because if I did not, I knew I would keep doing the same thing every night. I would keep lying still, facing the wall, letting fear grow bigger because I never checked. So I made myself do it. I took a breath. Then I turned around, and I saw a head floating in the room. It was the head of a middle-aged man. There was no body under it, no shoulders, no neck that I could see. Just his face, suspended in the darkness, staring directly at me. For 1 second, I did not understand what I was looking at. My brain tried to make it into something normal. A shadow, a reflection, a trick of the light, the shape of clothes hanging somewhere. Anything except what it looked like. But the face was too clear. I remember it vividly. He looked middle-aged. His face had the shape and features of an adult man, not someone elderly and not someone young. I do not remember every tiny detail now, but I remember the expression more clearly than anything else. He was angry, not mildly annoyed, not confused. Angry, his face was fixed in a way that made it feel personal, as though he had been watching me for a long time and was furious that I had finally looked back. His eyes were locked on me. His expression was tight and hostile. I remember feeling like he hated me, even though he never said a word. That was the part that scared me most. He did not smile. He did not move toward me. He did not make a sound. He just stared at me with this furious expression. For a few seconds, I could not move. I was fully awake. I knew I was in my room. I knew I had just turned around, and I knew there was a floating head in the darkness, looking directly at me. I did not scream. I did not jump out of bed. I did not run to my parents' room. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned back over. I faced the wall again and pretended I had not seen anything. That sounds ridiculous now. It probably sounds funny in the way people laugh when they talk about being terrified. But at the time, I honestly did not know what else to do. I was scared that if I reacted, it would react too. I was scared that if I looked at it again, it would be closer. I was scared that if I screamed, it would prove that it had gotten to me. So I just lay there. I kept my eyes shut. I tried to breathe slowly, even though my whole body was tense. I pretended I had not turned around. I pretended there was nothing behind me. I pretended I was asleep. I do not remember how long I stayed awake after that. It felt like hours. Every second felt too long. I was afraid to move. I was afraid to open my eyes. I was afraid to turn back and see whether the head was still there. At some point, I must have fallen asleep from exhaustion, but I did not sleep well. For a long time after that, I would think about his face whenever I went to bed. I would remember the anger in his expression. I would remember how clear he looked compared with everything else in the dark room. I would remember that feeling that he had been there before I saw him. Watching, maybe that was why I had always felt the burning eyes in the back of my head. Maybe I had never been imagining the feeling at all. Or maybe seeing the face made all those earlier nights feel worse in my memory. I have thought about that possibility too. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe I had woken up during one of those strange moments where your brain is still partly dreaming even though your eyes are open. Maybe the shadows and darkness formed a face for a few seconds, and because I was already afraid, my mind filled in the rest. That is possible. I know people can see strange things when they are between sleep and waking. I know a new apartment, stress, poor sleep, and fear can all make ordinary things seem terrifying. I know memory can hold on to emotion more strongly than details. But even knowing all that, I still remember his face. I remember how angry he looked. I remember the feeling that he was not just an image or a shadow. I remember the way my body reacted before I even had time to think. Turn away. Do not look again. Pretend you did not see him. I never told my parents. I knew they would not believe me, or at least I thought they would not. I did not want to explain that I had felt watched for a long time and then finally saw a man's floating head in my room. I did not want them to tell me it was a dream. I did not want them to look at me like I was making it up. So I kept it to myself. I continued sleeping in the room because I had no other choice. I continued going about my life. I went to school, did homework, hung out with friends, and tried to be normal. But there were nights when I would feel that same old pressure again. Not always, not as strongly, but enough to make me pull the blanket closer and stay facing the wall. I would lie there and tell myself not to turn around, because once you see something you cannot explain, it becomes harder to convince yourself that the darkness behind you is empty. I never saw the man's head again. I never saw a body attached to it. I never heard him speak. I never saw him in the hallway, in the mirror, or anywhere else in the apartment. It only happened that one time, but one time was enough. To this day, I do not know what I saw. Maybe it was a nightmare that slipped into waking life. Maybe it was my mind reacting to fear and darkness. Maybe it was something real that I cannot explain. All I know is that for a long time, I felt watched in that room. Then one night, I finally turned around to prove myself wrong, and there was an angry, middle-aged man's head floating in the dark, staring straight at me. I turned back over and acted like I had never seen a thing, and I never told anyone. I was in Korea at the time, working night shifts, and one night I saw something on the walk back to work that I still cannot explain. It was around 11 at night. I had been sent out to pick up food for the people working the shift, and I was heading back with the delivery in my hands. It was one of those normal work things that nobody thinks twice about. Someone had to go get the food, and it happened to be my turn. The route back to work was not far, but part of it went uphill. The building where I worked was up past a steep road, and the hill was surrounded by trees and patches of woods. During the day, it was not a big deal. People walked up and down that road all the time. You could see the houses, cars, signs, and the shape of the hill clearly enough. But at night, it felt different. The streetlights were spaced far apart. There were dark gaps between them where the road disappeared into shadow. The woods on either side of the hill became one solid black shape, with branches and undergrowth blending together. You could hear insects, wind moving through leaves, and the occasional distant sound from the city or nearby road, but most of the time it was quiet. That night, I was alone. I was almost back to work. I only had a little farther to go. I remember being tired in the normal way you get during a night shift. I was thinking about getting inside, handing over the food, sitting down for a minute, and getting through the rest of the night. I was not expecting anything strange. The hill was dark, but there was a light pole farther up the road. Its light reached part of the pavement and the edge of the woods. It was not bright enough to light everything around it, but it gave the area a weak yellow glow. As I walked uphill, I looked ahead. That was when I saw the figure. At first, I thought it was a person standing near the light pole. That was the most logical explanation. Someone could have been waiting for a ride. Someone could have been walking home. Someone could have been standing there using their phone. The road was dark, and from a distance, the figure was mostly a shape. But something about it did not look right. It was too tall. I stopped walking without really deciding to. The figure stood just outside the strongest part of the light. I could see its outline, but I could not make out a face or clothes clearly. It was dark against the darker trees behind it. Still, the light from the pole gave me enough to understand its general shape. It was well over 7 feet tall. At least, that was how it looked to me. I tried to tell myself that the slope of the hill was making it seem taller. Maybe it was standing on a raised patch of ground. Maybe the shadows were stretching its body. Maybe it was a tall man wearing a long coat. But the more I looked at it, the less normal it seemed. It was too narrow. Its arms seemed too long. And the fingers on one hand looked much longer than they should have been. I remember focusing on the hand because it was the part I could see most clearly. The figure had one arm hanging at its side. Its hand looked oversized compared with the rest of its body. The fingers were long and thin, almost too long to be human. For a few seconds, I stood completely still. The food bag was in my hand, and I suddenly became aware of how alone I was. There was no one immediately behind me. No cars were passing. No people were walking up or down the hill. There was only the road, the woods, the light pole, and that figure standing near it. I did not want to keep walking. I did not want to turn around and run either. I was frozen in that strange place between fear and disbelief, where your mind is still trying to find a normal reason for what you are seeing. The figure was not looking at me at first. It was looking down at one of its hands. That detail has stayed with me, because it made the whole thing feel even stranger. It did not seem to be waiting for anyone. It did not look like someone checking a phone. It was staring at its own hand as though it was studying it. Then it slowly started to lift the hand toward its head. The movement was slow, too slow. Its fingers bent in a strange way as the hand came closer to its face. I could not see exactly what it was doing because the light was weak and the figure was partly in shadow. But I remember watching the long hand move upward and feeling my body tense. I did not know whether it had seen me. I did not know whether I should call out. I did not know whether I should walk back down the hill. I kept standing there, watching it, trying to understand what I was looking at. Maybe it was someone wearing gloves. Maybe it was a person in a costume. Maybe it was an extremely tall person standing in bad lighting. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me because I was tired and the light was weak. Those thoughts kept coming into my mind, but none of them made me feel better. The shape of it was wrong. The height was wrong. The hand was wrong. Then the figure moved its head. It turned to the right, not toward me, not directly toward the road. It turned its head toward the woods. For 1 second, it stood completely still again. Then it sprinted. It ran straight into the trees. The speed of it was what frightened me most. It did not walk away. It did not slowly disappear behind the trees. It did not move like someone trying to avoid being seen. It launched itself into the woods. One moment it was standing beneath the light pole, tall and motionless. The next, it was moving so fast that I barely had time to understand what I was seeing. It crossed the edge of the road and vanished into the darkness between the trees. I heard movement in the woods after it disappeared. Branches shifting, leaves moving, something breaking through the undergrowth. Then, nothing. I stood there, staring at the place where it had gone. I could not make myself move. My whole body felt numb. I remember gripping the food delivery bag harder than I needed to, as if holding on to something ordinary could help me understand what had just happened. I kept looking at the woods, waiting for the figure to come back out. I expected to see those long fingers first. I expected to see the tall outline step back into the light. I expected it to turn its head toward me. But nothing came out. For a few seconds, the hill was completely silent. Then, I saw someone else walking down from farther up the hill. It was an ordinary person. I could not tell much about them at first, but they looked normal. They were walking at a normal pace, coming down the road in the direction of where I was standing. The strange part was that they did not seem to react to anything. They did not stop. They did not look toward the woods. They did not act like they had seen a 7-foot figure standing near the light pole moments earlier. They just walked down the hill as though nothing had happened. I remember wondering whether they had passed it. Maybe they had been farther up the road and never saw the figure because of the darkness. Maybe they had been looking at their phone. Maybe they had simply come around the corner after it had already disappeared. But watching them walk normally made me feel even more alone. It made me question myself. Had I really seen it? Had I misread a shadow near the pole? Had I mistaken some tall object for a person? Had I been so tired that my mind turned a tree, a sign, or something else into a figure? I kept looking back toward the woods, but I did not see anything move again. Eventually, I forced myself to keep walking. I did not want to walk past the place where the figure had been standing, but I had to get back to work. I could not stand in the middle of the hill forever. The food was getting cold. My coworkers were waiting, and part of me wanted to get somewhere bright, somewhere with people, somewhere that did not have a dark forest right beside the road. So I started moving. I kept my eyes on the woods as I walked past the light pole. The spot where the figure had stood was empty. There was no sign of anybody there. No footprints that I could see. No dropped bag. No clothes. No phone. No person standing behind the pole. Nothing. Just the light, the road, and the trees. I walked faster after that. Every sound from the woods made me turn my head. Every movement in the leaves made my stomach tighten. I kept expecting something tall to step out from behind the trees and block the road ahead of me. But I made it back to work without seeing anything else. When I got inside, I tried to act normal. I handed over the food. I probably said something about the walk taking longer than expected, but I was still shaken. My hands felt strange. My heart had not fully slowed down. The image of that figure under the light pole kept replaying in my mind. Eventually, I told some of my coworkers what I saw. They did not believe me. Most of them laughed it off. Some probably thought I was trying to scare them. Others may have assumed I had seen a drunk person, a tall stranger, or an animal in the dark and let my imagination take over. I understood why they were skeptical. The story sounded strange. I was walking alone at 11 at night. The road was dark. I was working a night shift. I had been tired, and I was trying to describe something I could not even see clearly enough to explain properly. But I knew what I saw. I saw a figure near the light pole. I saw how tall it was. I saw the long fingers. I saw it looking down at its hand. I saw it raise that hand toward its head. and I saw it sprint into the woods faster than any normal person should have been able to move. After my coworkers dismissed it, I started searching online. I tried to find out whether there was some creature, legend, or story in Korea that matched what I had seen. I searched for tall figures in the woods. I searched for things with long fingers. I searched for strange creatures people claimed to see at night near hills, forests, and mountain roads. I did not find anything that gave me a clear answer. Maybe I used the wrong words. Maybe there was a local story I did not know how to search for. Maybe what I saw had nothing to do with folklore at all. I was not trying to prove it was supernatural. I just wanted to find something that sounded close enough to make me feel less crazy. But nothing really matched. There were plenty of ghost stories, urban legends, and strange creature stories online. There are always stories like that, no matter where you are, but none of them explained the exact thing I saw. A tall, dark figure near a light pole, with long fingers, watching its own hand before suddenly running into the woods. I have thought about normal explanations many times since then. Maybe it was a very tall person. Maybe they were wearing dark clothing, and the strange lighting stretched their body into something less human looking. Maybe they had gloves on that made their fingers look longer. Maybe they were standing on a raised part of the ground, making them seem much taller than they really were. Maybe the hill and light pole created a weird illusion. Maybe my eyes could not judge distance correctly in the dark. A person farther away might have looked taller because of the angle. The shadows could have hidden their body and made their limbs seem longer. The movement of their hand could have been something completely normal that I misunderstood. Maybe they ran into the woods because they were trying to avoid me. That would be unsettling too, but it would at least be human. But even after considering all of that, I still remember how wrong it looked. I remember the way it stood. I remember the height. I remember the fingers. And I remember how it ran. It did not move like someone jogging away from a stranger on a dark road. It moved like something that had been completely still for a long time and then suddenly decided it did not want to be seen anymore. The person who came down the hill afterward has always bothered me too. I kept thinking maybe they would say something. Maybe they would look confused. Maybe they would mention seeing someone by the light pole. Maybe they would react to the movement in the woods. But they did not. They kept walking like the road was empty, like I was the only person who had seen anything. That was the feeling that stayed with me most after I got back to work. Not just fear. Isolation. I was standing on a dark hill, alone, looking at something I could not explain. Then a normal person walked down the same road and acted like the world was perfectly ordinary. Maybe it was. Maybe I was the one who had misunderstood a moment in the dark. But I have never forgotten it. I have never seen that figure again. I have never heard it in the woods. I have never had another night where something that tall stood near a light pole and looked down at its own long hand. It happened once. That was enough. Even now, when I think about walking uphill at night, I remember that road. I remember the weak streetlight. I remember the trees pressing close to the pavement. I remember stopping with the food delivery in my hand and looking up. And I remember the tall, dark figure standing there, completely still, before it turned and disappeared into the woods. I woke up around 4 in the morning to something hovering over me and my girlfriend. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. The room was dark, but not completely dark. There was enough weak light coming in from outside to make out the ceiling, the edges of the furniture, and the vague shape of the air vent above us. It was that strange hour of the night when everything feels still. No traffic outside, no voices from neighbors, no television through the walls, just the soft sound of the building settling and the quiet breathing of someone asleep beside you. I remember opening my eyes and immediately feeling like something was wrong. There was a black cloud spread out over us. It was only inches above the bed. It was not across the room. It was not near the ceiling. It was right there, hanging directly over both of us, wide enough to cover the space above our bodies. For a moment, I thought it might be darkness itself, somehow gathered into one place. That is the closest way I can explain it. It was black, but not like a shadow on a wall. It looked darker than the rest of the room. The room around it was dim, but I could still see the outlines of things. I could see the ceiling behind it. I could see the faint gray of the walls. But this cloud looked like it swallowed whatever light touched it. It was so dark that it seemed almost solid, while still looking fluid at the same time. It was not smoke. That is important to me, because smoke is the first thing everyone thinks of when I describe it. Smoke rises. Smoke drifts. Smoke spreads in a way that feels natural. You can see it thinning at the edges. You can smell it. You can usually tell where it is coming from. This did not look like smoke. It did not have that soft, fading shape. It was not wispy or gray. It was not coming from a candle, a vent, a kitchen, or anything else. It looked like a dark, fluid cloud, thick and smooth, moving in a way that made it feel alive. It reminded me more of ink spreading through water than smoke in the air. But even that is not quite right. Ink in water eventually breaks apart and drifts outward. This thing seemed to hold itself together. It spread across the air above us, but it did not lose its shape. It moved slowly, almost carefully, as if it had a purpose. For a few seconds, I could not move. I was fully awake. I know people can wake up in strange states. I know there are moments when your brain is partly asleep and partly awake, and you can see things that feel real even if they are not. I have thought about that since. I have tried to find an explanation that makes sense. But in that moment, I did not feel half asleep. I felt completely awake because of how frightened I was. I stared at the cloud above us, trying to understand what I was seeing. My first thought was that there had to be some physical explanation. Maybe something was wrong with the ceiling. Maybe there was smoke coming through the vent. Maybe the air conditioner had kicked on and blown dust into the room. Maybe a shadow from outside had changed somehow. But none of those things fit what I was looking at. It was hovering too low. It was too dark. And it was moving wrong. The cloud was spread out above us, almost like it had settled there while we slept. It did not touch us. It did not make any sound. It did not create a smell. The air did not feel hot or cold. Nothing in the room moved, but I could feel it. I do not know how else to say that. It had presence. The way you can feel someone standing close to you even before you turn around. The way the atmosphere in a room changes when something is there that should not be there. It felt like the air above the bed had become heavier. I slowly lifted my hand. I did not know why I did it. Maybe I was trying to prove to myself that it was not real. Maybe I wanted to see whether my hand would pass through it. Maybe I was just reacting without thinking. I pointed at it. The moment my finger got close, the cloud moved away. Not because of air movement, not because I waved my hand through it. It pulled back from my finger. It avoided it. That was the moment when my fear changed into something much worse. If it had been smoke, my hand would have disturbed it. If it had been dust, it would have scattered. If it had been some strange shadow or reflection, my hand would not have mattered at all. But this thing reacted. It moved backward from my finger like it did not want to be touched. It was not fast. It did not jerk away violently. It simply shifted away from where I was pointing, as though it understood what I was doing. I froze with my hand still in the air. For a second, I did not know whether to pull my hand back or keep it there. I was afraid that if I moved too much, it would react again. I was afraid that if I touched it, something worse would happen. I was afraid that it had already noticed me. It felt like it had been hovering over us while we slept, and now it knew I was awake. The cloud began moving upward. It did not rise the way smoke rises. It flowed. It started to pull itself toward the ceiling in slow, dark waves. The bottom part of it lifted first, then the rest followed. It was like watching something pour upward instead of downward. It stretched, thinned in some places, gathered itself in others, and kept moving toward the ceiling. I watched it the entire time. I could not look away. There was something terrible about how quiet it was. No sound came from it. No whisper, no hum, no crackle from the air vent. It moved in complete silence. As it got higher, it spread itself across the ceiling. The blackness flattened against the space above us like it had found a surface it could cling to. It moved slowly over the ceiling, stretching into a wide, uneven shape. It reminded me of dark liquid flowing across glass, except it was upside down. It looked alive. Not alive in the way an animal is alive. It did not have eyes, limbs, a mouth, or anything I could identify. It was not a person, and it was not shaped like one. But it behaved like something with intention. It had reacted to my hand. It had moved away. Now it was moving somewhere. At that point, I knew I needed to wake my girlfriend. I did not want to be alone with it. More than that, I needed to know whether I was actually seeing it. I needed someone else to look at it without me telling them what it was. I needed to know whether my mind had created it or whether it was truly there in the room. I turned toward her. She was asleep beside me, completely unaware of what was above us. I remember how normal she looked in that moment. She was lying there under the blankets, breathing slowly, while this dark thing moved across the ceiling above us. I said her name. At first, she did not wake up. I said it again, louder, then I shook her shoulder gently and told her to look. I did not give her any details. I did not say, "There is a black cloud over us." I did not say, "Look at the smoke." I did not say, "There is something on the ceiling." I only told her to look. I wanted to see what she saw without putting the idea into her mind first. She woke up confused. At first, she probably thought something was wrong with me. It was 4 in the morning, I was clearly frightened, and I was telling her to look up without explaining why. Then, she looked toward the ceiling. She went quiet. That silence was worse than anything. She stared up at the dark shape moving above us. I remember asking her what she saw. I was afraid to answer first. I did not want to influence her. I did not want her to describe what she thought I wanted her to see. She looked at the ceiling for another moment. Then she described it. A dark cloud, not smoke. Something black and fluid looking. Something moving across the ceiling. She described the same thing I had been watching. That was the moment I knew I was not alone in it. Whatever it was, she saw it too. She did not know I had pointed at it. She did not know it had moved away from my hand. She did not know how it had started above us, inches from our faces. She had only woken up in the middle of the event and seen it crawling across the ceiling, but she described it the way I would have. Dark, fluid, wrong, alive, the two of us lay there watching it. Neither of us knew what to do. We did not jump out of bed immediately. I think we were both too confused. It is strange how fear can freeze you. You imagine that if something terrifying happens, you will scream, run, turn on every light in the house, call someone, or do something dramatic. But sometimes your brain just stops. You sit there because the thing in front of you makes no sense. The cloud kept moving. It spread farther across the ceiling, heading toward the air vent. The vent was near the top of the room, and the dark shape seemed drawn to it. It flowed in that direction gradually, like it was being pulled by something inside the duct. The closer it got, the thinner it became. Not disappearing exactly, more like gathering. It narrowed into dark streams that slid across the ceiling. The shape kept changing as it moved. One part of it would stretch out, another part would fold back into itself, and then the whole thing would drift farther toward the vent. I remember expecting it to drop down again. I expected it to come closer. I expected it to turn into something else, but it did not. It kept flowing upward and outward until it reached the vent. Then it seemed to go through it. Not into the vent in the normal way smoke would be pulled through an air vent. It did not get sucked in by a fan. I do not remember hearing the system running. It simply moved toward the vent, stretched into the opening, and disappeared. The last dark part of it slid through the metal slats. Then it was gone. The ceiling was empty. The room was the same as it had been before. Nothing had changed. The blankets were still around us. The walls were still quiet. The air vent looked completely normal. There was no smoke smell, no stain, no noise from inside the ductwork. No trace that anything had just happened. But neither of us moved for a while. We just stared at the ceiling. I remember asking her if she really saw it. She said yes. I asked her what it looked like again. She described the same dark fluid cloud, the same black shape, the same strange movement. We tried to explain it to each other in the moment, but nothing sounded right. Maybe it had been smoke from somewhere else, but there was no smell. Maybe it had been dust, but it had moved away from my hand. Maybe something from the vent had blown out and then been pulled back in. But it had started directly above us, far below the ceiling, and it had looked too thick and controlled to be dust. Maybe we were both tired and saw the same thing, because I woke her up panicked. But I had not told her what to look for. She had described it on her own. The rest of that night, neither of us slept much. I turned on the lights. I checked the vent. I looked around the room. I probably opened the bedroom door and stood in the hallway for a while. I wanted to see whether there was smoke anywhere else in the home. I wanted to make sure nothing was burning. I wanted to find any kind of normal explanation. There was nothing. No smell, no alarm, no heat, no haze in the rest of the house, no sound from the vent. Everything was normal. That almost made it harder. If we had found a burnt wire, a problem with the heating system, a neighbor smoking outside, or any physical reason for a cloud in the room, I would have accepted it immediately. I would have been relieved. But we found nothing. The next morning, the room still looked normal. The vent still looked normal. The ceiling had no marks on it. There was no evidence. Just the memory of watching that black cloud move above us in the dark. I have thought about it many times since then. I have tried to be reasonable about it. I know that lack of sleep can affect perception. I know people can experience vivid visual events while waking up. I know that fear can make an ordinary thing look unnatural. I know that when someone wakes another person in a panic, it can influence how they see a situation. But I still come back to the same details. It was hovering inches above us. It moved away from my finger. It flowed upward toward the ceiling. My girlfriend saw it without me telling her what it was, and it disappeared through the vent. I do not know what it was. I am not saying I know it was a ghost, a spirit, an alien, or anything else people might want to call it. I do not have proof that it was some other kind of life. I only know that it did not behave like anything I had ever seen before. It looked like darkness, but it moved like it had a mind. That is what stays with me. Not only the image of it, not only the fact that it was over us while we slept, but the feeling that it reacted. The feeling that when I pointed at it, it knew. After that night, sleeping alone became difficult. When you wake up at 4 in the morning and see a dark shape above your bed, it changes the way you look at a dark ceiling. It changes the way you notice an air vent. It changes the way you react to shadows moving in the corner of your room. For a long time, I would wake up and look up immediately. I would check the ceiling before I checked anything else. Sometimes I would leave a light on. Sometimes I would keep the door open. Sometimes I would lie awake for a while, listening to the vent and trying to convince myself that the room was empty. I never saw it again. My girlfriend never saw it again either. There was no repeat event, no strange voices, no more black clouds. Nothing else happened that I can connect to that night. But it only took one time. One night was enough to make me wonder what else might exist around us without us knowing. Because whatever that thing was, it did not look like smoke, it did not look like a dream, and it did not move like something lifeless. It hovered over us while we slept, avoided my hand when I pointed at it, and then flowed up through the vent as if it had somewhere else to go. Even now, I do not get very good sleep by myself. When I was in college, my friends heard about a house that was supposedly haunted, so naturally a bunch of us decided to go there in the middle of the night. At the time, that seemed like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. We were college students, which meant we were old enough to know it was a bad idea, but still young enough to believe that bad ideas were usually funny stories waiting to happen. We had all heard some version of the rumor. The house had been empty for a long time. People said strange things happened there. Some said they had seen lights moving inside when no one was living there. Others claimed they heard voices or footsteps. A few people had supposedly gone in and come out feeling sick, scared, or convinced they had not been alone. Nobody had a clear story that matched anyone else's, which should probably have told us it was all made up. But that was not how we saw it. To us, it sounded like the perfect place to explore. We did not expect to find a ghost. We did not really expect anything to happen at all. We figured we would walk around in the dark, scare each other, maybe find some old furniture or creepy junk, and then go home with a story about how stupid we had been. One of my friends had a camera, so we brought it with us. It was not professional equipment or anything like that. Just a camera good enough to record video, catch audio, and prove we had actually gone inside. We wanted footage because we knew none of us would remember things the same way afterward. Someone would exaggerate. Someone would claim they heard something when they did not. Someone would probably scream at a loose curtain and insist it moved on its own. Having the camera felt like a way to keep everyone honest. At least, that was what we thought. We went late at night, after the streets had gone quiet. The house was in an area that did not have much activity around it. There were still roads nearby, and there were still houses in the neighborhood, but the place itself looked separated from everything else. Even before we got close, it had that abandoned feeling that makes an ordinary building look wrong. The yard was overgrown, the grass was high in places, and there were weeds coming up around the edges of the property. The front path was cracked and uneven. The windows were dark. Some looked dirty enough that you could barely see through them, while others reflected the moonlight in a way that made the house seem like it was watching us back. Nobody said much when we first got there. We all tried to act casual, but I think everyone felt some version of the same nervous excitement. You could tell by the way people laughed too loudly or made jokes that were not actually funny. A couple of us kept looking at the upper windows. Someone said something about how there was definitely going to be a dead body inside. Another person told them to shut up. The friend with the camera started recording before we went in. I remember the light from the camera catching dust in the air, I remember the sound of our shoes against the ground. I remember everyone speaking in low voices, even though there was no reason to whisper yet. We got inside somehow. I do not remember whether the door had been unlocked, partly broken, or easy to force open. I only remember that we did not spend much time outside once we got there. The moment we crossed the doorway, the mood changed. The air inside smelled old. It smelled like dust, damp wood, and closed-up rooms. There was a stale smell that seemed to settle at the back of your throat. The house had probably been empty for years, and everything inside looked like it had been left behind and forgotten. There was no furniture in most of the rooms, no lamps, no beds, no normal signs that anyone had lived there recently. Just empty floors, peeling walls, old debris, and the remains of things that had probably been useful once. A broken chair in one corner, a few boxes, pieces of paper on the ground, a door hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. The place did not feel haunted at first. It just felt abandoned, and abandoned places are creepy enough on their own. Every little noise seemed louder inside. A floorboard creaked when someone shifted their weight. A door moved slightly somewhere down the hall. Wind pushed against part of the house, making a faint rattling sound. Every time someone bumped into something, half the group would jump. We moved from room to room, looking around. At first, it was mostly jokes. Someone would shine the camera into a closet and say, "Hello?" Someone else would tell them not to invite anything out. Somebody found an old newspaper or a broken picture frame and acted like it was evidence of a murder. The camera kept recording all of it. Then one of us found something with the name Agnes Jones on it. I do not remember exactly what it was. It may have been an old letter, some kind of paper, a box, a piece of clothing, or an item with a label. I only remember the name clearly because it stood out. In a house that seemed empty of anything personal, seeing an actual person's name made the place feel more real. Agnes Jones. We said it out loud. Someone wondered whether she had lived there. Someone else asked whether she had died there. Another person made a joke about how we should not say her name too many times. Nobody took it seriously, but after that, the house stopped feeling completely empty. There was suddenly a name attached to it. Not just an old house, not just a creepy rumor, a name. We kept exploring. The camera followed us through the hallway, into rooms with stripped walls, past windows that showed nothing but darkness outside. There were places where the floor felt weak, and we had to watch where we stepped. There were rooms that seemed colder than the others, though that could have been because some windows were broken or because the house had no heat. At one point, we were moving through a room near the back of the house when someone stopped. I do not remember who it was. They lifted a hand and told everyone to be quiet. At first, I thought they were messing with us. That was normal for the group. Someone would hear a branch scrape the side of the house and pretend it was a voice. Someone would notice a shadow and act like they saw a person. So when they told us to be quiet, I assumed they were trying to build tension. But everyone stopped anyway. The camera kept recording. For about 10 seconds, nobody said anything. That does not sound like a long time. But in a dark, empty house in the middle of the night, 10 seconds of silence feels much longer. We stood still. I remember listening. I do not remember hearing anything. No footsteps, no whisper, no door closing, no voice. Nothing but the faint noise of the house itself. Then I broke the silence. I said, "Ah, fuck that." I do not remember exactly why I said it. Maybe I was nervous. Maybe I was annoyed at being scared by nothing. Maybe the silence had gone on long enough that I wanted to make everyone laugh again. It was probably my attempt to act brave. The group started moving after that. We continued through the house, filmed a little more, made more jokes, and eventually left. Nothing else stood out that night. There was no obvious ghost, no shadow figure, no object moving by itself. No one got pushed, scratched, or trapped in a room. We went home thinking it had been creepy, but not especially unusual. We had seen an abandoned house, found something with the name Agnes Jones, recorded some footage, and scared ourselves with our own nerves. That was supposed to be the end of it. Later, we watched the video. At first, it was exactly what we expected. There was shaky footage of us walking through the dark. There were jokes, whispered comments, people telling each other to stop being stupid. The camera picked up the house noises more clearly than we had noticed them while we were there. Floorboards creaking, doors moving, distant wind against broken windows. Then we got to the quiet part, the moment where somebody had told us all to stop talking. The video showed about 10 seconds of silence. You could see the camera moving slightly in the darkness. You could see vague outlines of the room. Nobody spoke. Then you could hear me say, "Aw, fuck that." And immediately after I said it, a voice said, "Help me." Clear as a bell, not faint, not buried under static, not something that could easily be mistaken for a creak or a distant sound. It sounded like a voice, a person saying, "Help me." The first time we heard it, nobody spoke. I remember the room going quiet again, but this time we were not in the abandoned house. We were somewhere safe, probably sitting around in an apartment or dorm room, watching the footage together. Someone rewound it. We played it again. There it was. 10 seconds of silence. My voice. Then another voice, close and clear. "Help me." The strange thing was that none of us had heard it while we were inside the house. Not one of us remembered hearing anyone say it. If we had heard a voice like that in the room with us, we would have panicked. We would have run. We would have talked about it immediately afterward. But nobody did. We only heard it on the recording. At first, I thought it had to be one of my friends messing around. That was the obvious answer. Maybe someone had whispered it when nobody was paying attention. Maybe someone had stood out of frame and tried to scare the rest of us. Maybe the person holding the camera had added it later. Maybe somebody was playing a prank and waiting for us to notice. But nobody admitted to it. And I know how that sounds. Of course, nobody would admit it immediately if they were trying to scare us. But we knew each other well. We had been friends long enough to recognize when someone was proud of a prank. Somebody would have laughed. Somebody would have cracked. Somebody would have claimed credit eventually. Nobody did. More than that, the voice did not sound like any of us. It was hard to tell whether it was male or female. It was quiet but clear, almost breathy, as if it had been spoken close to the camera. It did not sound dramatic. It did not sound like someone yelling from another room. It sounded desperate. That was what bothered me. It did not sound like a joke. It sounded like someone who needed help. We watched that section over and over. Each time, the silence felt worse. We tried turning the volume up and down. We tried listening with headphones. We tried to figure out whether it could be a sound from outside, a radio, a person walking past the house, or something picked up from another room. Nothing made sense. The house had been empty. We had not seen anyone else there. There were no nearby voices that we remembered hearing, and the timing was too strange. Right after I said, "Aw, fuck that." Then, "Help me." It became one of those stories we told people after that. We would show them the video. Most of them would laugh at first, assuming it was fake. Then they would hear the voice, and their expression would change. Some people said it was probably interference. Some said it was another person in the house. Some said it was one of us playing a prank. We did not have an answer. We just knew what the recording sounded like. A couple months passed. The camera ended up in a box under my roommate's bed. Nobody was watching the footage constantly. We had shown it to a few people, then put it away. The camera sat in that box with other random stuff. Cords, old games, papers, maybe clothes or electronics that nobody had a place for. It was not being used. It was not being passed around. Nobody had a reason to mess with it. Then, 2 or 3 months after we had first watched the video, we decided to show it to some other people. We brought the camera back out. We found the video. We fast-forwarded to the part we wanted to show them. The silent section was still there. The camera still moved through the same dark room. You could still hear me say, "Aw, fuck that." But the voice was gone. In its place was static. Not throughout the whole recording. Not before that part. Not after that part. Only that exact moment. The 10 seconds of silence, and the voice had been replaced by static. The rest of the video was perfectly fine. Everything before it looked normal. Everything after it looked normal. The audio came through clearly everywhere else. You could hear us talking. You could hear footsteps. You could hear doors and floorboards and nervous laughter. But the one part we had played again and again, the one part where the voice said, "Help me," was ruined. It was as if the recording had been damaged in only that one place. We watched it multiple times. We tried replaying it from the beginning. We tried skipping directly to the section. We tried using different settings. Nothing changed. Static. Just static. The voice was gone. That was when things became harder to explain. If someone had been messing with the tape, they would have needed access to the camera. But the camera had been sitting in a box under my roommate's bed. Nobody had taken it out. Nobody had told us they were editing anything. Nobody had a reason to replace only that one part with static. And even if someone had somehow manipulated it, why? Why record a voice saying, "Help me," and then erase it later? Why leave the rest of the footage untouched? Why make it look like the camera itself had swallowed the moment? We did not know. Around that same time, we found out the house had been destroyed by the town. It had been torn down within the months that the camera had been sitting under the bed. We had no idea at first. Someone mentioned it casually, or maybe one of us drove by and saw that the place was gone. The house that had stood there for years, the house people said was haunted, was no longer there. Just gone. I remember thinking about the name we had found. Agnes Jones. I remember thinking about the voice. I remember thinking about the static. And I remember feeling weirdly disappointed that the house was gone, even though I had no desire to ever go back inside it. There was no way to check anything anymore. No way to see whether the room looked the same. No way to find more things with that name. No way to return with another camera. No way to prove we had not imagined the entire thing. All we had was the damaged recording and our memory of what it sounded like before the static replaced it. To this day, I do not know what happened in that house. Maybe someone else had been inside while we were there. Maybe there was a person hiding somewhere in the back rooms, and the camera caught their voice even though none of us heard it. That would be terrifying, but at least it would be possible. Maybe the audio picked up a sound from outside and our brains heard it as words. People hear patterns in static and noise all the time. Maybe "Help Me" was never really there, and we only believed it was because we were already expecting something creepy. Maybe the camera had a glitch. Maybe the static happened naturally. Maybe the tape had been damaged by heat, moisture, age, or something in the box under the bed. Those are all possible explanations. But there are still parts that bother me. The voice was clear when we first watched it. We all heard the same words. It happened right after I said, "Aw, fuck that." Then, months later, the exact moment was gone. Not damaged around the edges, not partly distorted. Gone. replaced by static as if that section had been erased. None of us has ever been able to explain why. After that, Agnes became part of our group's vocabulary. Whenever something weird happens, we blame Agnes. Someone loses their keys and eventually finds them in a place they already checked. Agnes is fucking with us. A light flickers for no reason. Agnes, a door closes when there is no wind. Agnes did it. It is mostly a joke now. Mostly, but every time someone says it, I remember that house. I remember the empty rooms. I remember seeing the name Agnes Jones on something old and forgotten. I remember the camera recording 10 seconds of silence. I remember my own voice saying, "Aw, fuck that." And I remember the voice that came right after it. "Help me." Then I remember the static, and I wonder whether Agnes ever really left that house at all. Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.